Greetings, this is Dave LeClaire with MakeUseOf.com, and I'm here to tell you about the Logitech PowerShell, which is an iOS 7 compatible mobile game player. Basically what it does is it lets you play games with more traditional buttons, D-pad, shoulder buttons, and face buttons. So instead of having to limit your gaming to only touchscreen, you can actually play games kind of like how you would on a Nintendo DS, PlayStation Vita, or even a home console if we're playing on a tiny 4-inch TV. But either way, it's a pretty sweet device. It's very long, but it feels good while playing games, but it is missing some of the buttons of its competitors. So it does have a little bit of a drawback, but in the end it does feel pretty good. So let's check out playing games on it. Alright, so right now we are checking out a game called Bastion on the Logitech PowerShell. It uses the D-pad and the face buttons, so the missing buttons are actually not going to be a problem in this game. Have all the buttons you need to do what you want to do in this game, so it's definitely good for that. Bastion's a fantastic game, so if you've never played Bastion, I highly recommend checking it out. And if you happen to have a Logitech PowerShell, you can get the game on iPhone for a lot cheaper than you can on the other platforms, so it's actually a great way to play it. So I mentioned before that this thing is really big, but how big is it? Well, let's put it to scale with some of the handheld game consoles of the past. Let's start with where it all began, the original Nintendo Game Boy. So side by side, you can actually see that it is in fact longer than the Game Boy, and the Game Boy is a pretty beefy console. Now of course the Game Boy is thicker in terms of depth, but the actual length and how it's going to fit in your pocket, it is indeed longer. So let's move on to one of the beefier handheld consoles throughout history, the Sega Game Gear. The Game Gear is a behemoth, and it is in fact about the same length as the Logitech, but it's quite a bit bigger. The Logitech can easily fit on top of it and still have room to spare. So Game Gear definitely takes the cake as the biggest console, but the Logitech being about the same length still goes to show you just how big this thing actually is. Moving forward into something a little bit more modern, how about a original Game Boy Advance? So Game Boy Advance is definitely smaller, not by a ton, but it is smaller. So now as we get into the more modern stuff, Nintendo 3DS, again, smaller and pretty close in terms of depth, although it is slightly thicker, but not by a lot. And then we move to the newest behemoth in the portable handheld gaming space, Sony's PlayStation Vita, which is actually still a tiny bit shorter than Logitech's PowerShell. It's bigger in every other way, but in terms of the length, it's slightly shorter. So as you can see, the PowerShell is a very big device, and it's not one you're going to want to carry in your pocket every day, but it is small enough to comfortably fit into a backpack and carry around, and it's very lightweight, so holding it is definitely not a problem. It weighs less than your phone, so it's not too bad. All in all, the Logitech PowerShell is a pretty solid controller. It has 4 face buttons, a pause button, and an 8-way analog D-pad. The analog D-pad allows it to vary the amount of movement speed based on how fast you're pushing the button. So if you're playing a platformer and you push the button all the way in, your character is going to move faster. If you push it in a little bit, he's going to move slower. It also has 2 shoulder buttons on the top. Now on the downside, it's missing 2 analog sticks and 2 shoulder buttons, which you'll find on some other models on the market. This kind of limits the amount of games that it can play, but it's still a pretty solid controller. It's just not going to be able to play shooters. But for the price, it's a good deal. It's a little on the big side, but all in all, as long as you got a backpack and you can carry it around, it's definitely a good deal, and it even will charge your phone for you. Once again, this is Dave LeClaire with MakeUseOf.com. Thanks for watching.